So, I'm a huge Daredevil fan. Some of you may know this. I have been reading Daredevil comics now for decades, really. Of course, I was introduced to Daredevil comics in a great way through a lot of Frank Miller's early works. His run on Daredevil is seminal. It's revered for a reason. He pretty much reinvented the character, really leaned into the street level crimes, made Kingpin a villain, really the ultimate foe of Daredevil. Just did such great work with Matt Murdock and his pantheon of supporting characters and rogues galleries, and giving us stories like, Born Again, of course. But outside of Frank Miller's stuff, I have also read a lot of other Daredevil runs. Brian Michael Bendis is a revered run, often viewed as one of the best next to Frank Miller, if not, better than Frank Miller's run. Personally, my favorite run of Daredevil. But I think the sequel to that, Ed Brubaker's run, was absolutely fantastic. I thought that was great. And then I've read other runs that kind of changed it up. Both of Miller and Brian Michael Bendis and Brubaker, very dark, really gritty, street level, of course, and that's what made those runs so fantastic. Mark Waid changed it up a little bit, making a little, providing a little more levity, but still a great story. Don't read Andy Diggle stuff. That ruined it. That ruined just a great run of Daredevil comics. And I know there's been other runs, since then. I know people have talked about Charles Soule's run, people like him. I think Zdarsky's run, is that who the most recent Daredevil writer is? I'm not too familiar with those runs right now. Outside of the comics, I have seen other Daredevil adaptations, of course. The Ben Affleck Daredevil, which, now, to be fair, that movie was not Ben Affleck's fault. I thought he was actually fine in the movie. It's just everything else surrounding him was bad. Poor direction, poor writing, weird casting choices. For Elektra to Bullseye, it just really didn't work out for him. It sadly just seems to keep happening to poor Ben Affleck. He becomes a superhero, and he might doing the best he can with the material he's given, but sadly the material is just shit. But I think for a lot of people, outside the comics, their exposure to Daredevil was that movie, and maybe that one episode of the Incredible Hulk, the trial of the Incredible Hulk, that TV film. But Netflix's Daredevil, all the way back in the 2010s, that delivered on the premise, on the character, on the soul of Daredevil. I was very excited about it. Obviously, we were in really the heyday, the time where the MCU, for the most part, was firing all cylinders. Like, most of their movies coming out were like really good. People were excited about them, right? And, their TV fare, we hadn't really seen. We had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., by that point, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's, it was what it was. Yeah, it was what it was. But, the Netflix shows, Daredevil being the first one, them were like, okay, yes, it takes place in the MCU, maybe, who knows, make a reference or two. But they say they were going to lean into the grittiness. It was going to be more of a street level thing. It wasn't going to focus on the international antics of the Avengers or the cosmic stuff like the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like, we're going to go street level. And I think they delivered on a lot of that in season one in particular. Definitely season one. I thought it was a great introduction to those characters, to that world. Charlie Cox did such a wonderful job. Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin was great. Season two, of course, gave us the Punisher, John Berthel's the Punisher, which I think that's the best he's been so far, was in that season of Daredevil. And I think the first half of season two is great. The second half with the lecture in the hand, not a fan. When you start incorporating the fantasy stuff in the Daredevil, I really do think it falls apart, just because they don't really know how to define it. And when you can't define it, when you don't establish rules, it just kind of becomes nonsense. However, I felt they really redeemed themselves of season 3, which at this point is my favorite season of Daredevil. I thought it was just fantastic. They went back to the central relationship, the conflict between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, and introducing other characters like Bullseye, of course. And I thought they just delivered an excellent season. Probably my favorite season of all those Marvel Netflix shows. But of course, you had the Netflix deal with those Marvel shows. basically all shift over to, Disney proper, and they were taken off of Netflix, of course, and people were speculating like, well, what's going to happen with all these characters? What's going to happen with, Daredevil in particular, since that's the one that was the most liked and the most revered? There was a lot of concern. When it was announced that they were going to continue on with they were going to do a Daredevil series. But, people were concerned because the Marvel shows have been a mixed bag. Not to say that they've all been bad. I think WandaVision was great, and I really like the 2 seasons of Loki that we got. And obviously the animated fare, I think, has been good, really good what I've seen of X-Men 97 was excellent. But there's been a lot of stuff where it just hasn't been good. All right? It's just very, very disappointing. And then it was, it sounded like they were having issues behind the scenes, and they ended up just restarting, I think, production entirely. They scrapped it, and instead they're like, all right, you know what we were doing wasn't working, which I think is good on them. They realize, like, this isn't working. Let's bring in different people, different writers that understand this character and this world, and make it a proper follow-up, a proper continuation of the Netflix series. And I think that was very smart to do. I could not imagine what the series would have been if they chose not to continue. I think a lot of people, even myself, would have been extremely frustrated and disappointed by that. Because Daredevil Born Again is essentially Daredevil Season 4. It really is, which is great. It's an immediate follow-up after the events of Daredevil Season 3. And the star of this season, it absolutely delivers some incredible stuff, and starts with a very shocking moment, a tragedy, and an excellent action sequence between Matt Murdock and one of his deadliest foes. I thought, like, how they started this off was great. It's a fantastic first step forward into what I hope is going to be a really great season of television. After, I'm going to go into more details about the opening in just a bit. I want to give too much away. But after that initial opening, which is, 15 or so minutes, the series then does a 1-year time jump. Matt Murdock has pretty much abandoned the Daredevil persona. Many of his personal relationships at this point are in shambles. New York City is worse than ever. It's like New York City in the 1970s, Chad. It's like, oh my God. I mean, you could see fucking Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle walking down the street. It's like, that's how bad it's gotten. And the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, has returned to fill that void, to take control of New York as not its kingpin of crime, but as its mayor. What's the difference, some might say? And that is essentially, at least so far, the meat and potatoes of this series. Matt Murdock struggling to not return to being Daredevil, but ooh, he wants to be Daredevil so bad. He'll never admit it, but he's like, oh, I just want to punch people. I want to snap bones. I want to do some foul shit. And he does some foul shit in the show. And then the other part of it is Wilson Fisk entering New York politics and trying to deal with that, trying to figure out the structure of that, and also dealing with his estranged wife, Vanessa, which they brought back that actress again to this. Charlie Cox, I think, does not get enough praise for his performance as Matt Murdock. I mean, he's always gotten praise, sure, and a lot of critical acclaim, but to me, he's kind of on that same level in terms of his performance as a superhero, as a vigilante, as a comic book character, as Robert Downey Jr. was to Iron Man and Chris Evans was to Captain America. To me, he's on that level. He just does such a great job of bringing that rawness, that anger to this character, the showcasing all of Matt's flaws. Just how he plays, the lawyer by day and the vigilante by night. He just does this energy about him. It's the essential ingredient, I think, to Daredevil is rage. Like, you need to rage and that Catholic guilt. Like, those are the two essential. You need to have those things be a part of the character, and they always need to be under the surface. And how he's able to just seemingly portray himself as calm, and yet just like the smallest little thing with his voice, you can tell that he's just almost losing control. And that is so essential to the character. And it's on display throughout the first 2 episodes. And a lot of times he just fucking can't control himself and he loses it. And there's major repercussions. And he gets very frustrated. He's like, why did I do that? Why? Why did I have to break all those bones in that guy? And it's great. And that comes out so well in his relationship, in his scenes with Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin. Now, Vincent D'Onofrio was just perfectly cast as this character. We've always had our fan castings of who would make a great Kingpin, of course. And Vincent D'Onofrio was like, when he was cast, like, oh yeah, that's great. He can bring that physicality. He's a wonderful actor. But there's just some parts of his performance that when we first introduced him in season 1 of Daredevil that we just didn't expect. Like the way in which he talks. He has this cadence that's very, very different from what we expect from Kingpin. He has a very odd way of speaking, and yet almost socially awkward. Some people said he's neurodivergent. Some people said he's autistic. I don't know if that was Vincent D'Onofrio's intention of the character. Perhaps that informed it. But in any case, it just makes it really unique because he says these like really articulate and beautiful things in just a very interesting way. And you're just enraptured by his performance, you know. And that's on full display again here. Even he's a little leaner. He's not as big as he once was because Vincent D'Onofrio's old, but they actually comment on that. And actually, it's very funny between him and Matt in the show. But every scene Vincent D'Onofrio's in, I mean, he literally dominates. I mean, he's usually the biggest man in the room. But just through his performance and the material that he's given, you're just enraptured by him. And him entering the political world is so fascinating because it's so similar to the crime world, right? But there's like certain restrictions in place of him now. Like there's certain things that he has to do. And you kind of see him bristle, at least initially, to some of this stuff, although he's probably going to, you believe he's eventually going to like circumvent a lot of these things or change a lot of these things, you know, tear down the foundations and make it in the way he wants to make it, you know, similar to certain political things that are happening right now. And I feel like that's obvious what they're doing in the show, but it's not so overt where it's just like, he's Trump. They're not really saying that, but it's like, you can see, you can see what they're doing, which I think is totally fine, but he's great. And then you have the other side of which, like, yes, you get to see the bit of the gangster of Kingpin coming out. You see a lot of that in the fantastic conversations that he has of Charlie Cox in the show. Of course, that's all in the advertising. That diner scene that they have is great. But then you also see the sensitive side to him, which we've always seen throughout the original show, and you see that a lot with his wife, Vanessa. Which the actress' name escapes me, but she returns, and she's fantastic, but the relationship has shifted. It's changed. He's been gone for a long time, and they're not really together. Like, they're married, but they're essentially separated, and a lot of their story is them trying to repair their marriage or figure out, like, what are they now? And it's in the early period of that. But so far, I think it's been great. I really like what they're doing with them. And again, it just humanizes Wilson Fisk. And they've always done a great job of that, but I'm glad that they're still leaning into it. They're not just having him be, you know, a fat guy in a white suit. He's not that. It's like, no. We're really want to get into the psychology of this character. We're bringing up his history from the previous seasons. Other characters are bringing up the history of these characters from previous seasons. Like, I'll tell you right now, you need to watch. I mean, I think it would behoove you. I think it would improve your viewing if you watch the previous 3 seasons of Daredevil. It's like, they do a good job of recapping a lot, of kind of reintroducing you to this world, you know. But you can pretty much get into it, sure, if you've watched like the first season at the very least, and maybe season 2. I would say season 3 because they do reference that a lot. But it would just help out. I think it would just really help out watching those previous seasons. because they bring in that history right there. And so I think that's great. Like, if you were concerned that they were just going to wipe the slate clean and ignore everything from the past, like, don't worry, the past plays a very important role, an essential role in this series, which I think is very smart and great. And I think it does right by the fans who were justifiably concerned that they were just going to ignore all that, because that was essentially what they were going to do. So I'm glad they made that change. In terms of the stories that they're adapting right now, I don't want to say too much. Obviously, the main one, the one that's obvious, is Kingpin as Mayor, which is, I guess, from one of the more recent Daredevil runs. I believe it's Charles Soule, who, again, which I have not read a lot of Charles Soule's run of Daredevil. I wish to now, since this idea of this guy who is essentially this criminal, this businessman, who believes, like, I want to save New York. I'm the only one that can fix. They even have, like, the caps for him where it's called Fisk Can Fix It, which is very, very, very fun, very, very cool. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is an interesting dynamic, because so many people, like, despise him because they remember what he did. But then you have those whole generation of people, they don't even know what the fuck he is. They're like, Wilson Fisk, he's great. This guy, like, during the debates, he's saying all that crazy stuff. I love this guy. He's a man's man. He's for the people, right? And I like that they're playing that up. I think it's very good. But then the other story that they're really focusing on right now is the trial of the White Tiger, which I believe is from Bendis's run. I'm pretty sure it was from Bendis's run, maybe Brubaker. Pretty sure it's Bendis's run, where Matt essentially has to defend another vigilante, which is really interesting. And he's putting so much of himself into this because he essentially views his client as himself. And so much of this season so far is Wilson Fisk going like, I don't want any more of these vigilantes out here, okay? They keep beating the shit out of me, all right? And we're going to do away with all that. Like, something that's what he's really into. We've had it where so many of New York citizens, the city's been under attack so many times, whether it be from, costumed criminals or aliens or gangsters, that people feel abandoned. They've relied on these people, and Fisk is trying to manipulate that, saying, like, those people are the root cause of all those things. We need to get rid of them. And they're playing that up, and Matt's like, I feel personally attacked, even though I'm retired as Daredevil, because he's always going to be Daredevil. That's always, even though he says, I don't want to put on the horns anymore. I don't want to pick up the Billy Club. That's not who I am. That's so a part of him. And when he indulges in it, he's fucking really, really good at it. And that's the thing. So far, I've liked a lot of the drama. The stories, I think, have been very good. Again, the meat and potatoes relationship between Matt and Wilson is still firing on all cylinders, but the action so far is great. And they're like, hey, we didn't abandon that. You see a fantastic action sequence within the first 15 minutes of episode 1, and it is great. And they've evolved a little bit more. Like, Daredevil, he's hopping around a lot more on, like, building stuff. He's using the Billy Club a little bit more. So he's a little more athletic, and that's great. He gets into a horrific scrap, a horrific battle with one of his greatest foes. And it's nasty. A lot of people die. Like, if you're thinking, like, oh, Marvel, they're not going to have any of the blood and gore like the previous seasons. Like, I think they killed, like, so many people in the beginning of the first episode. It's like, God damn, it's great. It's super, super gory. But at the same time, it's not just gore for the sake of gore. It's not just action for the sake of action. Like, the action all has consequences, and you see that there. And I really liked how they dealt with that. It was like, oh, God damn. And just, it pretty much sets everything in motion, at least for these first 2 episodes, but I imagine for the rest of the season so far. I think it's off to a very good start. I'm excited to see where this is going to go. And especially after episode 2. Like, episode 2, they know how to do it. They released these first 2 episodes. I'm guessing, I don't know if it's going to be in batches of 2 or just 1 per week, but they were very smart to end it with episode 2, because Matt does something where it's like, oh, Matty, how are you going to get out of this one? We know he's going to get out of it, but it's just like, oh, no. That's not, and even he's like, fuck, at the end of it, because he does something that's like, those people deserved it, but you might have gone a little too far. And this also shows that in this season, Daredevil goes a little too far. And that is a part of Daredevil's character. Like, unlike, some heroes were like, oh, I can't do this, I have to pull back even though I want to. Daredevil's like, fucking hit him again. Go get a few more licks in. It's okay. He could take it. I'm like, I don't think that guy could take it, man. I don't think he's moving. I think he's paralyzed from the neck down, Matt. He's that kind of guy, and I'm glad they lean into that. And it shows you that he is just so dominated and controlled and wrapped up in his rage, and it's really affecting his way of thinking and perceiving the world around him. And it's great because that is Daredevil. That is essential to the character. It's one of his things that make you like him, but it's also one of his major flaws. And I want to go into more details in the future about some of these new supporting characters they introduced. They do introduce some familiar faces, of course, as I mentioned. But they do have a supporting cast. But again, they're trying to reestablish. Okay, we're coming back to this world. Here we are. This is the new plot lines and stuff. And they introduce some new people. Some children of some characters we might have known from the previous seasons, which is like, oh, you're the offspring of this person. I'm like, oh, that's gonna be interesting. So I think that's really fun. But yeah, color me very impressed with these first 2 episodes. If you were concerned, I justifiably so, if you were concerned about Disney shepherding this series and them kind of sugarcoating it and taking away all the guts and grime and gore and the drama of Netflix's Daredevil, then rest assured, at least so far, it's off to a very, very good start. But what about you guys? I'm very curious. What do you think of Daredevil Born Again, at least these first 2 episodes? Did you really like it? Were you more mixed on it? Did you just downright hate it? Like, I don't need you, old hornhead. Get out of here. And what did you think of the original seasons of Daredevil on Netflix? What do you think of the character? I love Daredevil. He's one of my favorite, not just one of my favorite Marvel characters, one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. I love old hornhead. Let me know.